Imagine this. The capital city of the world's biggest empire is on fire. The city is in total chaos, and the emperor himself is literally packing his bags to run for his life. In a room full of powerful men absolutely freaking out, one voice cuts through the panic. It's a woman's voice, and what she says next will be remembered for 1,000 years. But this was no ordinary queen who was born rich. This was Theodora, a former circus performer, an actress, and a prostitute. A woman who clawed her way up from the absolute bottom of society to become the most powerful woman on the planet. So how does someone with a past so scandalous that the laws of the land had to be rewritten just so she could get married, not only win over an emperor but become the one person who could save his entire empire from collapsing? This is the insane story of Theodora, the Empress who went from the gutter to the throne and used her power to change the world for women. It's the story of a queen who, as her enemies would say, slept her way to power, and then proved to every single person she deserved to keep it. Our story doesn't start in a palace. It starts in the dirt and chaos of the Constantinople Hippodrome around the year 497 CE. This was the crazy heart of the city, a massive stadium where people gambled on chariot races and watched brutal, bloody entertainment. This is where Theodora was born into a life that promised her absolutely nothing. Her dad, Acacius, was a bearkeeper for the Green Team, one of the city's huge chariot racing factions. His job was to take care of the animals for the halftime shows, a job at the absolute bottom of the social ladder. Theodora and her two sisters grew up hearing the roar of the crowd and smelling the circus. Just surviving was a daily challenge, and their entire future depended on the rich guys running the games. Then their entire world fell apart. Theodora's dad died suddenly, leaving her mom with 3 little girls and 0 money. In a totally desperate move, her mom quickly remarried and begged the Greens to give her new husband the same job. They said no. In a moment of public humiliation, her mom walked her 3 little girls into the middle of the roaring stadium and presented them to the rival Blue faction. The crowd went wild, and the Blues gave the family a small job. This was Theodora's first huge lesson in how power works, how much public opinion matters, and how insane rivalries could literally make or break you. To help the family survive, Theodora and her sisters were forced to become actresses. Now, acting back then was not what you think. It was basically burlesque, mime, and almost always prostitution. The law saw actresses as infamous, giving them 0 basic rights, just like brothel owners. Theodora started as a backup for her older sister, but she was a total standout. Her gift was comedy and an incredible talent for using her wit and her body to win over rowdy, drunk crowds. The most famous and most insane story about her early life comes from the historian Procopius in his crazy secret history. Now you have to take this with a huge grain of salt. It's basically a giant diss track, but it paints a picture of a woman famous for her wild performances. He describes her most famous act, a parody of the myth of Leda and the Swan, that left nothing to the imagination and made her one of the most infamous and desired women in the entire city. This was a life of total exploitation, but it was also a masterclass in survival. Every dollar she earned, every bit of attention she got, proved she could handle a world that saw her as a product. She was learning how to read people, how to play on their desires, and how to use her insane mind as a weapon. She may have been at the bottom of the world, but in the dirt of the Hippodrome, she was building the skills that would one day let her run an empire. The life of a courtesan was usually short and brutal, but Theodora's story was about to take a crazy turn. She became the girlfriend of an official named Hecabolus, who was made governor of Pentapolis in modern-day Libya. She went with him to North Africa, which was a huge step up, a chance to see how the rich lived. But the relationship was a total disaster. Heliopolis dumped her for reasons we still don't know, leaving her stranded thousands of miles from home with no money. This should have been game over. Instead, it was the start of her reinvention. Her journey home was epic. She traveled through the biggest cities of the Eastern Mediterranean, and in Alexandria, Egypt, she found a new purpose. Alexandria was the center of huge religious debates. It was here that Theodora started hanging out with leaders of monophysitism, a type of Christianity that the main church called heresy, but was super popular in Egypt and Syria. She seems to have had a genuine, massive religious conversion. She completely gave up her old life and became incredibly pious. This was more than a new faith. It was a total rebrand. She came back to Constantinople not as the scandalous performer, but as a woman with a new mission. She got a small house near the palace and made a living by spinning wool, a totally respectable job. The old Theodora was gone. In her place was a woman just as smart and amazing, but now with a quiet dignity and a crazy devotion to her faith. And that's when she was noticed by the most powerful man in the empire, Justinian, the nephew and heir of the emperor. Justinian was a genius, super ambitious, and a total workaholic, and he was completely fascinated by this mysterious wool spinner. What did he see in her? Of course, she was beautiful, but he also saw a mind and a will of iron that was a perfect match for his. He saw a partner, someone who understood power from a side he could never imagine. Their connection broke every single rule of their society. There was just one giant problem: the law. An old Roman law made it illegal for a man of Justinian's rank to marry an actress. It was a law designed to keep infamous women away from the rich elite. Anyone else would have just made Theodora his mistress. But Justinian didn't want a mistress. He wanted a wife, an empress. So he did something that was unthinkable. He decided to change the law. He had to convince his uncle, the emperor, and the Empress Euphemia, who hated the idea. It took time, but he actually did it. In 525 CE, the old law was gone. Soon after, Justinian and Theodora were married in the Hagia Sophia. The girl from the circus was now the wife of the heir to the throne. It was an incredible love story, but it was also a brilliant political move. When the emperor died 2 years later, in 527 CE, Justinian became emperor, and right beside him, crowned empress, was Theodora. She had climbed from the absolute bottom to the absolute top. Her journey to power was complete. Now the real challenge began: keeping it. Theodora didn't just move into the palace and relax. From day one, she made it clear she was Justinian's co-ruler. She wasn't just his top advisor. She was his partner in running the entire empire. She met with ambassadors, wrote to generals, and her opinion in state councils was just as important as anyone else's. Justinian himself called her his partner in our deliberations. She had her own court, her own seal, her own spies. Power was now a two-person job. And just 5 years into their reign, that power faced the ultimate test. The year was 532 CE, and it all went down in the Hippodrome, the exact place her story started. The city's chariot racing fans, the blues and the greens, were basically huge political gangs. Tensions finally exploded when leaders from both sides were arrested. In the middle of the races, the impossible happened. The two rival teams united. A new chant started roaring from the stands, aimed right at the emperor. Nika. It means conquer or win. It was a declaration of all-out rebellion. The riot exploded out of the stadium and set the city on fire. Mobs torched buildings, including the first Hagia Sophia, and hunted down officials. The city was in total anarchy. The senators who hated Justinian and Theodora saw their chance and backed the mob, declaring a new emperor. For 5 days, Constantinople burned. Justinian and his court were trapped. The situation looked completely hopeless. His best generals, including the legend Belisarius, told him there was only one move left: run. They had ships waiting, filled with treasure, ready to escape into exile. Justinian, for the first time ever, was ready to give up. But as the men were planning their escape, Theodora stood up. The room went silent. She told them this was no time to be cowards. She argued that living as a fugitive wasn't a life worth living. Her speech ended with one of the most hardcore lines in history. For one who has been an emperor, it is unendurable to be a fugitive. Royal purple is the noblest shroud. Her words were like a lightning bolt. Ashamed and inspired, Justinian and his generals snapped out of it. The will to fight was back. They made a ruthless new plan. Belisarius and another general launched a surprise attack on the Hippodrome, where tens of thousands of rioters were celebrating. They sealed the exits and started a massacre. By the end of the day, an estimated 30,000 people were dead. The Nika riots were crushed. The rebellion was over. Justinian's throne was safe, but everyone knew who had really saved it. It was Theodora. When the emperor was ready to run, it was the former circus girl who showed them what real power looked like. She proved that royalty wasn't about your blood, it was about your will to rule, and hers was made of pure iron. With their power secured by blood, Justinian and Theodora started one of the most ambitious rebuilding projects in history. Justinian rewrote 1,000 years of Roman law and rebuilt Constantinople to be more magnificent than ever, with the incredible new Hagia Sophia as its crown jewel. But behind the era's most progressive social changes, you can see the personal mission of the Empress. Theodora used her power to attack the very system that had exploited her. Her own life gave her a unique view into the suffering of women at the bottom. She knew everything about forced prostitution and how vulnerable women were with no legal or financial protection. Her laws were a direct assault on those problems. One of her first huge campaigns was against sex trafficking. She pushed for a law that banned forced prostitution across the entire empire. And she didn't just sign a paper. She personally oversaw the closing of brothels in the capital. Knowing this would leave thousands of women with nowhere to go, she used government money to buy their freedom and set up a huge convent called the Metanoia, the Convent of Repentance. It was a safe haven, offering housing and support for former prostitutes. This was a radical act of social welfare, driven by a woman who had been there. Theodora also took a sledgehammer to the laws around marriage, giving women rights they had never had before. She championed divorce reforms that made it easier for women to leave abusive husbands and, most importantly, made sure they could get their dowry back. She also won women greater rights to the guardianship of their own children. She went right after the insane double standards of the time. In a move that shocked everyone, she helped pass a law that made it illegal for a man to kill his wife for committing adultery. It was still a crime, but this law stopped a husband from being the judge, jury, and executioner. She also strengthened property and inheritance rights for women, giving them way more financial security. Where did all this come from? It came from her life. When she fought for poor women, she was fighting for the little girl whose dad, the bear keeper, had died and left her family with nothing. When she built a sanctuary for former prostitutes, she was building the safe place she never had. Her deep religious faith was also her guide. As a devout monophysite, she saw herself as a protector of her persecuted faith. While her husband's official policy was to enforce Orthodox Christianity, Theodora was running a secret operation. She hid monophysite bishops who were fleeing persecution, sometimes right inside the imperial palace. It just shows her incredible influence that she could openly defy her husband's religious policy and face zero consequences. Of course, the old rich guys were horrified by all this. This upstart empress was tearing down traditions that were centuries old. In their eyes, a woman like her had no business being on the throne, and now she was turning their world upside down. And all that anger found its voice in the poison pen of the historian Procopius. While official histories were being written celebrating Justinian's reign, a very different book was being written in secret. Procopius, the same historian who was publicly praising the empire, was privately writing a hate-filled book called the Anecdota, or Secret History. This book was a total character assassination, and his #1 target was Theodora. In this book, Procopius doesn't paint Theodora as a ruler, but as a demon from hell, a manipulative monster obsessed with lust and cruelty. He digs up every single rumor about her past, describing her stage acts in graphic detail. He accuses her of running a network of spies and assassins, of destroying her enemies with blackmail, and of being unbelievably vicious. To him, her religion was just a cover for her evil plans. The Secret History is one of the most fascinating and frustrating books ever. On one hand, it's a rare, gossipy look into the royal court. On the other, it's pure propaganda, fueled by personal hatred and the fear of a society seeing a woman with so much power. Procopius and his friends were terrified of Theodora. She was a woman from the gutter who refused to be quiet, and now she was their empress. As one historian puts it, any woman in that society who wasn't submissive was bound to be outright demonized. Procopius's book has forever defined Theodora's reputation, creating this split image of her as either a saint or a sinner, a feminist icon or a ruthless monster. The truth is probably somewhere in the messy middle. Was she ruthless? Almost definitely. You don't survive in that court without a spine of steel, and Theodora's was forged in fire. But to just call her the monster Procopius described is to ignore the facts. Her laws were real, the laws protecting women, the shelters she built, her defense of religious minorities. These aren't the acts of some one-dimensional villain. They are the work of a ruler with a clear vision, shaped by her own life and a deep empathy for the powerless. And maybe the biggest proof of her influence is what happened after she was gone. Theodora died in 548 CE, probably from cancer. Justinian was completely shattered. He lost the love of his life, but he also lost the partner who was the foundation of his entire reign. He ruled for another 17 years, but he never remarried, and historians point out that the wave of progressive social laws basically stopped after she died. It was like the engine behind that change had just been switched off. So, who was Theodora? Was she the courtesan who used her body to get power, or the empress who ruled with a courage that put every man around her to shame? Was she the evil villain from the Secret History, or the social reformer who fought for the weakest people in her empire? The answer is, she was all of it. Her life proves that people are too complex for simple labels. She was a survivor of a brutal childhood who took the skills she learned on stage and used them in the theater of imperial politics. She was a woman who experienced the worst kind of exploitation and rose to a position where she could break the tools of that exploitation for others. Her journey from the hippodrome to the palace is more than a rags-to-riches story. It's one of the most radical and unbelievable climbs to power in all of human history. She saved her husband's empire with her courage and then helped remake its laws with her beliefs. She proved that the daughter of a bearkeeper could have more vision and guts than any rich aristocrat. Her legacy is a crazy, fascinating mix of scandal and reform, of piety and politics. She remains one of history's most compelling figures, an eternal testament to the power of a woman who didn't just seize power, but dared to use it. If you want to learn more about the most incredible people who ever lived, make sure you smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. And let us know in the comments, was Theodora a saint, a sinner, or something else entirely? What part of her story blew your mind? We want to hear what you think. Thanks for watching.